What if I told you that a decorated Navy SEAL, a man who'd served his country with honor for 12 years, could be reduced to tears in a courthouse hallway by a single moment of cruelty? The marble floors echoed with footsteps that morning in downtown Richmond, Virginia. The air carried that peculiar courthouse smell, old wood polish mixed with anxiety and hope. Marcus Washington, 35 years old, with silver threading through his close-cropped hair, straightened his dress uniform one last time before entering Courtroom 3B. He'd worn this same uniform through ceremonies in 7 countries, but today felt different. Today, he wasn't fighting for his country. He was fighting for his daughter's future. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor where, in just a few hours, everything he believed about justice would be tested in ways his military training never prepared him for. Where are you watching from today? Marcus had never imagined he'd be sitting in a family court at 35, but life has a way of rewriting our plans. His 8-year-old daughter Lily meant everything to him. Her laugh could light up the darkest room, and her curious questions about everything from butterfly wings to submarine engines reminded him daily why he'd chosen to serve. When his ex-wife, Sandra, decided to relocate to California for a new job, taking Lily with her, Marcus knew he had to fight. Not with the tactical precision he'd learned in the Navy, but with something far more challenging: navigating the civilian legal system. The custody modification hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock. Marcus arrived at 8:30, wanting time to center himself the way he'd learned during those long nights in Afghanistan. He'd saved for months to hire attorney Rebecca Chen, a sharp woman in her 40s, who'd explained that his military service record would work in his favor. Judges respect stability and dedication, she'd assured him. You've got both in spades. He settled into the wooden bench outside the courtroom, reviewing his notes one final time. Deployment schedules, school records, medical appointments, every piece of evidence that showed his commitment to being Lily's father. The hallway gradually filled with other families, their hushed conversations mixing with the click of heels on marble and the rustle of legal documents. At 9:15, Sandra arrived with her attorney, a man in an expensive suit who barely glanced at Marcus. She looked different, more polished somehow, like the corporate world had given her a new shell. They exchanged a brief, civil nod. Despite everything, Marcus held no anger toward her. They both wanted what was best for Lily. They just disagreed on what that looked like. Officer Bradley Hutchins was working courthouse security that morning, a thick-set man in his early 40s whose badge seemed to carry the weight of every frustration he'd ever felt. He'd been on the force for 18 years, mostly patrol work, and courthouse duty was supposed to be the easy assignment. But lately, everything felt like a battle to him. The city was changing, his neighborhood was changing, and he didn't much like what he saw. When Officer Hutchins spotted Marcus in his dress blues, something soured in his expression. Here was another one, he thought, probably trying to impress some judge with that uniform. He'd seen it before, military guys thinking they deserved special treatment just because they'd served overseas. Hutchins had tried to enlist once, years ago, but a childhood injury had disqualified him. The rejection had left a bitter taste that never quite went away. As families filed toward the courtroom, Hutchins positioned himself near the metal detector, watching everyone with the same suspicious glare. When Marcus approached, checking his phone for a text from his attorney, Hutchins stepped into his path. "Excuse me," Marcus said politely, trying to move around him. "Hold on there, soldier boy," Hutchins said, his voice carrying just loud enough for others to hear. "What's all this about?" He gestured at Marcus's ribbons and insignia with a dismissive wave. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he'd gotten during his first days of boot camp when drill sergeants tried to break him down. But this wasn't training. This was his daughter's future hanging in the balance, and he couldn't afford to let emotion take control. "I'm here for a custody hearing," Marcus replied calmly. "My attorney's waiting inside." "Custody hearing?" Hutchins laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Figured you military types knew better than to abandon your kids in the first place." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Around them, other families slowed their pace, sensing tension. Marcus's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "I served 3 tours protecting this country, officer. I've never abandoned anyone." "Sure you haven't," Hutchins said, stepping closer. "That's what they all say." The courthouse clock chimed 9:30. Marcus could see Rebecca Chen through the courtroom doors, motioning for him to join her. This was his moment. Walk away, take the high road, focus on what mattered. But Hutchins wasn't finished. "You know what I think?" Hutchins said, his voice, dropping to a whisper meant only for Marcus. "I think you're just another deadbeat trying to hide behind that uniform. Judges see right through that act." Something inside Marcus cracked. Not his training, not his discipline, but something deeper. The part of him that had endured discrimination before, the part that had learned to swallow pride and keep moving forward. But this morning, with his daughter's future in the balance, and this man questioning everything he'd sacrificed for, the weight became too much. "That uniform represents 12 years of service," Marcus said, his voice still controlled, but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "I earned every ribbon, every commendation. I'm here because I love my daughter and I want to be part of her life." Hutchins smiled then, a cold expression that seemed to say he'd found exactly what he was looking for. What happened next would replay in Marcus's mind for months afterward, each detail burned into his memory with the clarity that only comes from moments that change everything. Officer Hutchins looked around the hallway, noting the families, the attorneys, the court clerks, all potential witnesses to what he was about to do. Then he made his choice. "You raising your voice at me, boy?" Hutchins said, the last word carrying decades of ugly history. The hallway seemed to freeze. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A young mother pulled her child closer. Marcus felt his training kick in. Assess the situation, control your breathing, find the exit strategy. But there was no exit strategy here. This was a courthouse, supposedly a place of justice and order, and yet he felt more vulnerable than he had in any combat zone. "I'm not raising my voice," Marcus said quietly. "I'm trying to get to my hearing." "See, that's your problem, right?" "There," Hutchins replied, his hand moving to his belt. "No respect. Think that uniform makes you special?" Rebecca Chen appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting from impatience to alarm as she took in the scene. "Marcus, is everything all right?" Before Marcus could answer, Hutchins made his move. Later, witnesses would describe it differently. Some saw a deliberate kick, others called it a shove with his foot. But everyone agreed on one thing. Officer Hutchins used his boot to strike Marcus in the back of his left knee, the same knee that had been injured during his second deployment and still ached on cold mornings. Marcus stumbled forward, his dress uniform jacket catching on the metal detector as he tried to keep his balance. The sound that escaped him wasn't quite a cry, wasn't quite a gasp. It was the sound of a man's dignity being stripped away in public. His military decorations clicked against the metal frame as he steadied himself, the bronze star and purple, heart suddenly feeling like weights rather than honors. "Oops," Hutchins said with mock concern. "Better watch where you're walking, sailor." "Navy SEAL," Marcus corrected automatically, his voice barely above a whisper. It was a strange thing to focus on in that moment, but military precision dies hard. "Whatever," Hutchins replied. "Same difference to me." The courthouse had gone completely silent now. Rebecca Chen was already on her phone, and Marcus could hear her speaking rapidly to someone about incident documentation and witness statements. An elderly court clerk, a black woman who looked like she'd seen too much history repeat itself, shook her head sadly and whispered something to her colleague. Marcus's hands trembled as he straightened his jacket. Not from fear. He'd face down. Enemy fire without flinching, but from the sheer humiliation of it all. This wasn't how heroes were supposed to be treated. This wasn't how fathers were supposed to enter courtrooms. This wasn't how Americans were supposed to treat Americans. You... All right, son. The voice belonged to Judge Harold Martinez, who'd stepped out of his chambers to see what was causing the commotion. He was a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes, that had seen plenty of courthouse drama, but rarely anything this blatant. Marcus looked up, meeting the judge's gaze with as much dignity as he could muster. "Yes, Your Honor, just eager to get to my hearing." Judge Martinez's eyes moved from Marcus to Officer Hutchins, taking in the scene with the careful observation of someone who'd spent 30 years weighing evidence and reading people. "Officer Hutchins, I need to see you in my chambers. Now." "Judge, I was just doing my job, maintaining order." "Now, officer." As Hutchins followed the judge, his swagger diminished considerably. Marcus finally made it through the metal detector, where Rebecca Chen was waiting with a bottle of water and a look of barely contained fury. "Marcus, we need to document everything that just happened. That was assault, plain and simple." "I'm fine," Marcus said automatically, the same response. He'd given medics after taking shrapnel in Kandahar. "No, you're not fine, and more importantly, this can't stand." Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and her expression changed. That was my paralegal. She was watching from the gallery and got most of it on video. Marcus felt something shift inside him then. Not anger exactly, but a kind of clarity he recognized from his military days. Sometimes you had to choose between keeping your head down and standing up for something bigger than yourself. Sometimes the mission required you to take a stand. "What do we do?" he asked. "First, we win your custody case. That's why we're here. But after that," Rebecca's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "After that, we make sure Officer Hutchins learns that there are consequences for what he just did." The courtroom doors opened and families began filing in for the 10 o'clock session. Marcus took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and walked in with as much dignity as he could gather. He had a daughter to fight for, and no small-minded bully in a uniform was going to stop him from being the father Lily deserved. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. The custody hearing itself felt surreal after what had happened in the hallway. Marcus sat at the defendant's table, hyper-aware of every movement, every glance from the gallery. Behind him, his knee throbbed where Hutchins had kicked him, but he kept his focus on Judge Martinez, who was now presiding over his case with the same careful attention he'd shown in the corridor. Sandra's attorney painted Marcus as an absent father, a man whose military career had always come before his family. The words stung because they carried fragments of truth. He had missed birthdays during deployments, had been thousands of miles away when Lily took her first steps. But absence born of service wasn't abandonment, and Marcus hoped the judge could see the difference. When it was time for Marcus to testify, he walked to the witness stand with measured steps. Judge Martinez watched him carefully, and Marcus wondered if the morning's incident would color how the judge saw him now. Would he be viewed as a troublemaker, a victim, or simply as what he was, a father fighting for his child? "Mr. Washington," Rebecca Chen began gently, "can you tell the court about your relationship with your daughter Lily?" Marcus's voice was steady as he described bedtime stories read over video calls from Afghanistan, care packages sent home, filled with drawings and letters, the promise he'd made to always be there for her. He talked about the house he'd bought in Richmond, specifically because it was in Lily's school district, about the room he'd painted pink with purple butterflies because she'd mentioned loving them in a phone call, and your plans if the court Grants you primary custody? I've accepted a position with the Veterans Administration here in Richmond, Marcus said. No more deployments, no more months away. I want to be the father I couldn't always be while I was serving. Sandra's attorney cross-examined him aggressively, questioning his ability to provide stability after years of military life. Marcus answered each question with the same calm professionalism he'd used during military briefings, but inside he could feel himself fracturing. The morning's humiliation, the scrutiny of the courtroom, the possibility of losing Lily, it was almost too much. During the lunch recess, Marcus found himself alone in the courthouse cafeteria, staring at a sandwich he couldn't bring himself to eat. That's when she approached him, the elderly court clerk who'd witnessed the incident with Officer Hutchins. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, settling into the chair across from him without waiting for an answer. "I'm Dorothy Williams. Been working these halls for 32 years. Marcus nodded politely, unsure why she was introducing herself. "Seen a lot of things in my time," Dorothy continued, unwrapping her own lunch. "Some good, some not so good. What happened to you this morning? That wasn't good." "It's fine," Marcus said automatically. Dorothy fixed him with a look that reminded him of his grandmother. "Son, I've got grandsons your age. Don't you tell me it's fine when it clearly isn't. That officer was way out of line, and Judge Martinez knows it." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "But I also know something you might find interesting. Judge Martinez, his oldest son is Marines. Did 3 tours in Iraq. The judge knows what service means, knows what sacrifice looks like." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. "I just want my daughter to be proud of me." "She already is, honey. Anyone can see that from the way you talk about her. But sometimes we've got to fight for more than just ourselves. Sometimes we've got to fight so the next person doesn't go through what we did." Dorothy stood up, patting Marcus's shoulder gently. "You think about that, son. Think about what kind of world you want that little girl to grow up in." The afternoon session resumed, with character witnesses for both sides. Sandra's mother testified about Marcus's long absences. Marcus's former commanding officer, Colonel James Peterson, testified via video link about Marcus's character and dedication. But it was the final witness that surprised everyone. Judge Martinez called Officer Hutchins to the stand. "Officer Hutchins, you're not part of this custody case, but there was an incident this morning that occurred in my courthouse. I want to address it on the record." Hutchins looked uncomfortable, his earlier swagger completely gone. "Your Honor, I was just maintaining order. Officer, I've reviewed the security footage and spoken with multiple witnesses. What I saw was not maintaining order. What I saw was an unprovoked assault on a veteran in my courthouse. The room was completely silent." Marcus felt his heart racing, not from fear this time, but from something that felt like hope. "Your Honor," Hutchins tried again. The man was being aggressive. The man was standing quietly, trying to attend his daughter's custody hearing. "Officer Hutchins, you are hereby suspended pending a full investigation by Internal Affairs. Furthermore, I'm ordering you to attend sensitivity training and anger management counseling." Judge Martinez turned to Marcus. "Mr. Washington, I want to apologize on behalf of this court for what happened to you this morning. No one should be treated that way, especially not in a place dedicated to justice." Marcus stood up slowly. "Thank you, Your Honor." But Judge Martinez wasn't finished. "I'm also ruling in your favor regarding custody. Your daughter will remain in Richmond with you as the primary guardian. Your service record, your commitment to stability, and your obvious love for your child make this decision clear." The gavel came down with finality, and Marcus felt his legs almost give out. Not from Officer Hutchins' kick this time, but from pure relief. Behind him he could hear Sandra crying softly, not from anger, he realized, but from her own complex mixture of emotions. Have you ever faced something like this? Share your experience in the comments. 3 weeks later, Marcus received a phone call that would change everything. He was in his kitchen, helping Lily with her homework at the same wooden table where he'd spent countless hours studying legal documents for the custody case. The house felt different now, warmer, more complete, with her laughter filling the rooms. "Mr. Washington, this is Captain Sarah Rodriguez with Richmond PD Internal Affairs." Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. He'd given his statement about the courthouse incident, provided Rebecca Chen's video evidence, but he hadn't expected to hear back so soon. "We've completed our investigation into Officer Hutchins," Captain Rodriguez continued. "I wanted to inform you personally that he's been terminated from the force, effective immediately." The words hung in the air. Marcus had expected suspension, maybe probation, but termination seemed almost too much to believe. "There's more," Captain Rodriguez said. "During our investigation, we discovered this wasn't an isolated incident. Officer Hutchins had multiple complaints filed against him over the past 2 years. Complaints that were inadequately investigated and improperly dismissed. Your case brought all of this to light." Marcus sank into his chair, watching Lily color. A picture of a butterfly with careful concentration. "What happens now? We're implementing new training protocols for all officers. Mandatory bias training, de-escalation techniques, and civilian oversight of complaint investigations. We're also reviewing every case Hutchins was involved with over the past 5 years. After the call ended, Marcus sat quietly for a long moment. Justice had been served, but it felt different than he'd expected. Not like victory in combat, where enemies were clear and objectives were black and white. This felt more complicated, more nuanced, like healing rather than winning. "Daddy?" Lily looked up from her coloring. "Who was that on the phone?" "Just some work stuff, baby girl. Nothing for you to worry about." But that evening, after Lily was asleep, Marcus found himself thinking about Dorothy Williams's words from the courthouse cafeteria. "Sometimes we've got to fight so the next person doesn't go through what we did." He thought about other veterans, other fathers, other people who might face the same humiliation he'd experienced if nothing changed. The next morning, Rebecca Chen called with unexpected news. "Marcus, I've been contacted by the Richmond Times-Dispatch. They want to do a story about what happened at the courthouse, but the broader issues of police accountability and veteran treatment." Marcus's first instinct was to decline. He'd gotten what he wanted, custody of Lily and justice for Hutchins. Why risk more public attention? "I know it's a big decision," Rebecca said, "but think about it this way. Your story could help other people. It could show that the system can work when good people stand up and speak out." That weekend, Marcus took Lily to the park, where they'd played when she was little, before the divorce, before the deployments, when life seemed simpler. She was 8 now, old enough to understand some of what had happened, old enough to ask questions. "Daddy, why did that police officer hurt you?" Marcus pushed her on the swing, buying time to find the right words. "Sometimes people do wrong things, sweetheart. Sometimes they're scared or angry about things that have nothing to do with the person they hurt. But police officers are supposed to be good guys. Most of them are. But even good people sometimes make bad choices. What matters is what happens afterward, whether they learn from their mistakes and try to do better." Lily pumped her legs, swinging higher. Did he learn from his mistake? Marcus thought about Captain Rodriguez's call, about the training programs being implemented, about the other cases being reviewed. "I think so, baby. I think a lot of people learned something." On Monday, Marcus called Rebecca Chen back. "Let's do the interview, but I have conditions." The story ran on the front page of the Richmond Times-Dispatch 3 weeks later. The headline read, "Navy SEALs Courthouse Encounter Sparks Police Reform." The article was balanced, focusing not on individual blame, but on systemic change. It mentioned Officer Hutchins's termination, but emphasized the new training programs. and oversight procedures being implemented. The response was overwhelming. Marcus received letters from veterans across Virginia sharing their own stories of discrimination and bias. He heard from police officers who supported the reforms and wanted to do better. Most surprisingly, he received a letter from Officer Hutchins himself. The letter was brief, written in careful handwriting on plain paper. "Mr. Washington, I know. I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm sorry, truly sorry. What I did was wrong, and there's no excuse for it. I've been attending counseling and anger management classes trying to understand why I acted the way I did. I hope someday I can make amends for the harm I caused. I hope your daughter is proud of her father because she should be. Respectfully, Bradley Hutchins." Marcus read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it in his desk drawer. Forgiveness would take time, but accountability had been swift and meaningful. The Richmond Police Department officially asked Marcus to speak at their new bias training seminars. Standing before a room full of officers, many of them looking uncomfortable and skeptical, Marcus didn't talk about anger or revenge. Instead, he talked about service, how both military service and police service required protecting and serving. All people, regardless of race or background. "I don't want Officer Hutchins destroyed," Marcus told them. "I want him to understand that the uniform he wore was supposed to represent the same values as mine: honor, integrity, service. When we fail to live up to those values, we don't just hurt individuals. We hurt the very institutions we're supposed to represent." If you've been moved by this journey, subscribe for more heartfelt stories. 6 months after the courthouse incident, Marcus stood in his backyard watching Lily practice soccer with the Richmond Youth League team he now helped coach. The autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves and the sound of children's laughter. His knee still ached sometimes, especially when the weather changed, but the deeper wounds had begun to heal. The sliding door opened behind him, and Sandra stepped onto the deck. Their relationship had evolved since the custody decision. Not back to romance, but toward something better, genuine co-parenting built on respect and shared love for their daughter. "The Times-Dispatch wants to do a follow-up story," Sandra said, joining him at the porch railing. 6 months later, how the reforms are working." Marcus nodded, still watching Lily weave between orange cones with determined concentration. "What? Do you think?" "I think you should do it. You've started something important here, Marcus. Don't let it fade away." She was right. The Richmond Police Department's new training program had become a model for departments across Virginia. Officer complaints were now investigated by an independent civilian board. Cultural sensitivity training was mandatory for all new recruits. 3 other officers had been dismissed for misconduct that might have been overlooked before Marcus's case brought scrutiny to the department's practices, but the changes went deeper than policy. Marcus had received dozens of letters from people sharing their own stories of injustice, and more importantly, their efforts to create change in their own communities. A veteran in Norfolk had started a legal clinic for service members facing discrimination. A police officer in Virginia Beach had founded a community dialogue program, bringing officers and residents together for monthly conversations. "Daddy, did you see that goal?" Lily called out, jogging over with grass stains on her knees and pure joy on her face. "I saw it, superstar. You're getting faster every week." As Sandra headed inside to start dinner, Marcus reflected on how much had changed, not just in his life, but in his understanding of what justice really meant. In the military, justice was often swift and clear. You followed orders, completed the mission, protected your brothers and sisters in arms. Civilian justice was more complex, requiring patience and faith in systems that didn't always work perfectly, but could be improved when good people demanded better. His phone buzzed with a text from Captain Rodriguez. "Thought you'd want to know. Officer Bradley Hutchins just graduated from the police academy in Fredericksburg. Completely different man. Thanks for giving him a second chance to do better. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment. He'd heard through Rebecca Chen that Hutchins had enrolled in community college after his termination, studying criminal justice with a focus on community policing. The man who had kicked him that morning in the courthouse had apparently spent months in counseling, working to understand and change the prejudices that had driven his actions. That evening, after Lily was asleep, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a blank sheet of paper. The follow-up interview was scheduled for tomorrow, and the reporter had asked him to think about what he'd learned from the whole experience. What had he learned? That institutional change was possible, but required courage from individuals willing to speak up. That accountability and redemption weren't mutually exclusive. That his daughter was watching how he handled both victory and conflict, learning lessons about dignity and justice that would shape her own character. He picked up his pen and began to write. The measure of a society isn't whether injustice occurs. It will, because we're all imperfect people in imperfect systems. The measure of a society is what happens after injustice occurs. Do we acknowledge it? Do we learn from it? Do we create systems to prevent it from happening again? The next morning's interview went well. The reporter, a young woman named Jennifer Martinez, Judge Martinez's niece as it turned out, was thorough but respectful. She asked about the long-term impact of the incident, the effectiveness of the police reforms, and Marcus's perspective on forgiveness and accountability. Do you think Officer Hutchins deserved a second chance? She asked near the end. Marcus thought carefully before answering. I think everyone deserves a chance to do better, but only after they've been held accountable for their actions and done the work to change. The fact that he was terminated sent a message. There are consequences for abusing power. The fact that he's apparently used that consequence as motivation to become better. That gives me hope for all of us. 2 weeks later, the follow-up article ran with a photo of Marcus and Lily at her soccer game. But the image that stayed with readers wasn't the action shot of Lily scoring a goal. It was a smaller photo in the sidebar, Marcus's Purple Heart Medal, which he'd framed along with a letter from a young police officer in training who'd been inspired by his story to serve with honor and treat every person with dignity. On a cool November morning, almost exactly 1 year after the courthouse incident, Marcus received one final letter that brought the whole experience full circle. It was from Dorothy Williams, the court clerk who'd sat with him in the cafeteria on that difficult day. Dear Mr. Washington, I wanted you to know that I'm retiring next month after 33 years in the courthouse. In all that time, I've seen a lot of people come and go, faced with situations that tested their character. You passed that test with flying colors. More importantly, you turned a moment of injustice into a force for positive change. That courthouse is a better place because of what you did. That police department is better because of what you did. This community is better because of what you did. Thank you for showing us all what courage and dignity look like. Your daughter is lucky to have you as a father, and we're all lucky to have you as a neighbor. With deep respect and admiration, Dorothy Williams. Marcus folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer next to Officer Hutchins's apology. Outside, he could hear Lily practicing piano, working through the scales with the same determination she brought to everything in her life. The afternoon sun streamed through the kitchen window, warming the wooden table where they did homework together every evening, where they talked about her day at school and his work at the VA. This was what victory looked like, Marcus realized. Not a dramatic courtroom moment or a newspaper headline, but a quiet house filled with love, a community working to be better, and a little girl who would grow up knowing that justice was possible when good people found the courage to stand up for what was right. He picked up his coffee mug, a Father's Day gift from Lily with "World's Best Dad" painted in purple letters, and stepped onto the back porch. The autumn air was crisp and full of possibility, carrying the sound of children playing in backyards throughout the neighborhood. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. But today, this moment, was perfect, just as it was. The phone rang inside the house, and Lily called out, "Daddy, it's for you." But Marcus took one more moment on the porch, breathing in the peace he'd fought so hard to find. Then he headed inside, ready for whatever came next, carrying with him the quiet strength that comes from knowing you've done right by your child and your community. If you've been touched by Marcus and Lily's story, please give this video a thumbs up, share your own thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories that show how ordinary people can create extraordinary change. Thank you for watching, and remember, justice isn't just something that happens to us. It's something we create together, one act of courage at a time.